The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white envelope, government seal in the corner, my name and address printed in crisp black letters. Nothing special, really. Except that it was special, wasn't it? Because they chose me. Me, out of all the people in this god-forsaken city. Me, and not that smug bastard Dave from accounting who always acts like he's better than everyone else. I tore open the envelope, my heart racing. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the letterhead bearing the logo of some agency I'd never heard of. The Cognitive Resilience and Isolation Management Program. Cute. The letter was brief, to the point. They were offering me a unique opportunity to participate in a psychological experiment. One night in a sealed room, monitoring my reactions to controlled environmental stimuli. And for this, they were willing to pay me $5,000. $5,000. More money than I'd seen in, well, longer than I cared to admit. Enough to cover my overdue rent and maybe, just maybe, buy something nice for Sarah. Show her that I'm not the loser she thinks I am. That I can provide for her, give her the things she deserves. I read the letter again, looking for the catch. There had to be a catch, right? Things like this don't just happen to people like me. But no matter how many times I read it, the offer remained the same. One night, $5,000. Simple. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number to call if I was interested. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. What if it was a scam? What if they were going to harvest my organs or something? But then again, what if it was real? What if this was my chance to finally turn things around? I glanced at the framed photo on my desk, the one of Sarah and me from happier times. Her smile so bright and genuine, not like the forced, tight-lipped thing she gives me these days. When was the last time she looked at me like that? When was the last time she looked at me at all? Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up my phone and dialed the number. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice cool and professional. Cognitive Resilience and Isolation Management Program. How may I assist you? Yeah, I stammered, suddenly nervous. I got this letter about an experiment. Something about spending a night in a sealed room. Ah, yes, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, like she was genuinely pleased to hear from me. When was the last time anyone had been pleased to hear from me? You must be Mr. Thompson. We've been hoping to hear from you. They'd been hoping to hear from me? Me specifically? I felt a warmth in my chest, a feeling of importance I hadn't experienced in a long time. Yeah, that's me, I said, trying to sound confident. I'm interested in participating. What do I need to do? She gave me an address and a time, told me to bring a change of clothes and any personal items I might need for an overnight stay. No electronics allowed, she stressed. No phones, no watches, nothing that could interfere with the experiment. As I jotted down the details, a thought occurred to me. Hey, how did you choose me for this? I mean, why me specifically? There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to make me wonder if I'd said something wrong. Then, Mr. Thompson, you were selected based on a very specific set of criteria. Let's just say you have qualities that make you ideal for this study. Qualities? What qualities? I wanted to ask more, but she was already wrapping up the call, telling me she looked forward to seeing me tomorrow evening. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Qualities that make me ideal. The words echoed in my head, filling me with a mixture of pride and unease. What did they see in me that I couldn't see in myself? I thought about calling Sarah, telling her about the experiment. Maybe she'd be impressed. Maybe she'd realize that I'm special after all, that I'm not just some loser who can't hold down a job. But no, better to wait. I'd tell her after, when I had the money in hand. Then she'd have to take me seriously. The next evening, I stood outside a nondescript office building on the outskirts of town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. I checked the address again. Sure, I must have made a mistake. This didn't look like a place where government experiments happened. But then the door opened, and a woman in a crisp white lab coat stepped out. Mr. Thompson, she called. We've been expecting you. Please come in. I followed her into the building, my footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. Where was everyone? Shouldn't there be other participants? Other researchers? But the woman, Dr. Simmons, she introduced herself, assured me that everything was in order. We prefer to conduct these experiments one-on-one, she explained as we rode the elevator to the top floor. It allows for more accurate data collection. The elevator doors opened onto a long, sterile hallway. At the end was a single door, heavy and metal, like something you'd see in a bank vault. Dr. Simmons led me towards it, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Now, Mr. Thompson," she said, turning to face me, "I need to remind you that once you enter the room, you'll be sealed in until morning. We'll be monitoring you the entire time, of course, but we won't be able to communicate with you directly. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I hesitated, a flutter of anxiety in my stomach, but then I thought of the money. Thought of Sarah's face when I showed her the cash. "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Dr. Simmons nodded, seemingly satisfied. She pressed a code into a keypad next to the door, and with a hiss of hydraulics, it swung open. The room beyond was underwhelming, about the size of my bedroom at home, with plain white walls and a single bed in the corner. A small bathroom was visible through an open door. No windows, of course, just bright fluorescent lights overhead. "You can leave your bag here," Dr. Simmons said, indicating a small locker outside the room. "Remember, no electronics inside." I handed over my phone and watch, feeling strangely naked without them. As I stepped into the room, Dr. Simmons gave me one last smile. "Good luck, Mr. Thompson. We'll see you in the morning." The door closed behind me with a final sounding thud. I heard multiple locks engaging and then silence, complete utter silence. For the first hour or so, it wasn't so bad. I explored the room, though there wasn't much to see. Lay on the bed for a while, staring at the ceiling. Used the bathroom, paced back and forth, counting my steps. But as time wore on, the silence started to get to me. It was oppressive, seeming to press against my eardrums. I found myself straining to hear something, anything. The hum of the lights, maybe, or the sound of air moving through vents. But there was nothing. I tried talking to myself, just to break the quiet. "This is easy," I said out loud. "Piece of cake, be over before you know it." But my voice sounded wrong somehow, flat and lifeless, as if the room was swallowing the sound. I shut up pretty quickly after that. I don't know how long I'd been in there when I first heard it. A whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination. I sat up, heart pounding, ears straining. There it was again. A voice, definitely a voice, but I couldn't make out the words. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" No response. Just that maddening whisper, always just on the edge of comprehension. I got up, pressing my ear against the wall. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I moved around the room, trying to pinpoint its source, but it was impossible. And then, suddenly I could understand it. "She doesn't love you," the voice hissed. "She never loved you." I jerked back from the wall, my heart racing. "What? Who's saying that?" "You know it's true," the voice continued, louder now. "Sarah. She's probably with him right now. With Dave. Dave, that smug asshole from accounting, the one who's always hanging around Sarah's desk, making her laugh with his stupid jokes." No, it couldn't be true." "You're lying," I shouted at the empty room. "Shut up! You don't know anything." But the voice wouldn't stop. It kept whispering, telling me things I didn't want to hear. Things about Sarah, about Dave, about how everyone at work laughed at me behind my back. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voice was inside my head now, growing louder, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but then I saw them. Images, flickering behind my eyelids like some twisted slideshow. Sarah and Dave together, laughing, kissing, doing other things. Things she used to do with me before she started pulling away. Before the coldness set in. "No," I moaned, sinking to the floor. "Please stop. I don't want to see this." But the images kept coming, each one more vivid, more painful than the last. And always that voice whispering in my ear, telling me how worthless I was, how pathetic, how Sarah had never really loved me, how she was just using me until something better came along. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up on the floor, my hands pressed against my ears. Time had lost all meaning. There was only the voice, the images, and the growing certainty that I had made a terrible mistake. When I finally opened my eyes, I realized something had changed. The room looked different, smaller somehow. I blinked, sure I must be imagining things. But no, the walls were definitely closer than they had been before. I scrambled to my feet, panic rising in my throat. I ran to one wall, pressing my hands against it. It felt warm, almost alive under my touch, and as I watched horrified, it moved. Just a fraction of an inch, but unmistakably, it moved. The room was shrinking. "Hey!" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Let me out. Something's wrong." But there was no response. Just that voice, still whispering, now joined by others. A chorus of accusations and insinuations, each one cutting deeper than the last. I spun around, trying to find the source of the voices, but the room was empty and smaller, definitely smaller. The ceiling was lower now, the walls closing in like some kind of demented trash compactor. "This isn't real," I muttered, pressing myself into a corner. "It's not real. It's just part of the experiment. They'll stop it soon. They have to." But they didn't stop it. The room kept shrinking, the voices kept whispering, and I started to lose it. I saw things, terrible things. Sarah and Dave, their faces twisted into mocking sneers. My coworkers laughing at me, pointing and jeering. My parents, shaking their heads in disappointment. All of them pressed against invisible walls, watching me, judging me. "You're not real," I screamed at them, lashing out with my fists. But my hands passed through them like they were made of smoke, and they just laughed harder. The room was so small now that I couldn't stand up straight. I was on my knees, huddled in a space that felt more like a coffin than a room. The air was thick, hard to breathe. Or maybe that was just the panic, squeezing my chest like a vice. "Please," I whimpered, no longer sure who I was talking to. "The researchers? The voices? God, please let me out. I'll do anything. Just make it stop." And then miraculously it did stop. The walls stopped moving. The voices fell silent. The visions disappeared. For a moment, I just sat there gasping for breath, afraid to believe it was over. Then slowly the room began to expand. The walls moved outward, the ceiling rose, until everything was back to its original dimensions. I heard a click, and the door swung open. Dr. Simmons stood there, clipboard in hand, that same professional smile on her face. "Congratulations, Mr. Thompson," she said, as if nothing unusual had happened. "You've completed the experiment." I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she was saying. "Completed?" That's all she had to say? What was that?" I managed to croak out, my throat raw from screaming. "What did you do to me?" Dr. Simmons' smile never wavered. "We exposed you to a carefully calibrated series of auditory and visual hallucinations, combined with some spatial distortion effects. All perfectly safe, I assure you. Your reactions were most informative." I struggled to my feet, my legs shaky, my mind reeling. "Informative? You showed me things, made me hear things, about Sarah." "Ah, yes," she interrupted, making a note on her clipboard. "The personalized content, based on our preliminary psych eval, we tailored the experience to your specific insecurities. Quite effective, wouldn't you say?" I lunged at her then, driven by a rage I didn't know I possessed. But before I could reach her, two large men in white uniforms appeared, grabbing my arms and holding me back. Now, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Simmons said, still maddeningly calm. "There's no need for that. You've done very well. Your payment will be transferred to your account shortly." "Keep your money," I spat, struggling against the men's grip. "I want to know what you did to me." "Why me? Why did you choose me?" For the first time, Dr. Simmons' smile faltered, just for a moment. She glanced at her clipboard, then back at me. "Mr. Thompson, surely you understand. We needed someone susceptible, someone with the right combination of desperation and psychological vulnerability. And you, well, you fit the profile perfectly." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I sagged in the guard's grip, the fight draining out of me. They'd chosen me because I was weak, because I was pathetic, because I was exactly the kind of loser that Sarah thought I was. "Take him to processing," Dr. Simmons said to the guards. Standard debrief and release protocol. As they dragged me away, I caught one last glimpse of the room. My prison for the night. It looked so normal now, so innocuous. Just four walls and a bed. But I knew the truth, knew what it could become. They took me to another room, made me sign a stack of papers I didn't bother to read. Non-disclosure agreements, liability waivers, God knows what else. I signed them all, my hand moving mechanically, my mind still reeling from what I'd experienced. When they finally let me go, the sun was rising. I stood outside the building, blinking in the harsh light, feeling like I'd aged years in a single night. My phone buzzed in my pocket. They'd returned my belongings at some point, though I couldn't remember when. I looked at the screen. A text from Sarah. "Where are you? You didn't come home last night." Are you with her? Of course she'd assume I was cheating, because that's the kind of person she thinks I am. The kind of person I am. I started walking, no particular destination in mind, just away from that building, away from what had happened in that room. But I couldn't escape the voices in my head, couldn't unsee the things I'd seen. My phone buzzed again, a notification from my bank app. The transfer had gone through. $5,000, just like they'd promised. Blood money. I thought about calling Sarah, trying to explain. But what would I say? That I'd volunteered to be tortured for money? That I'd let them play on my deepest fears and insecurities? That I'd seen her with Dave even though I knew it wasn't real? No, I couldn't tell her any of that. She'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. I found myself in a park, the early morning joggers giving me a wide berth. I must have looked a sight, disheveled, wild-eyed, probably still reeking of fierce sweat. I collapsed onto a bench, my head in my hands. The chirping of birds should have been soothing, but all I could hear were echoes of those whispers. She doesn't love you. She never loved you. Over and over, like a broken record in my brain. My phone buzzed again, another text from Sarah. If you're not home in an hour, don't bother coming back at all. I stared at the message, my vision blurring. This was it, the beginning of the end. And the worst part? A small, traitorous part of me was relieved. Because if she left me, at least I wouldn't have to wonder anymore. Wouldn't have to question every smile, every laugh, every time she came home a little later than usual. But no, I couldn't let it end like this. I had to try, had to explain. Even if I couldn't tell her the whole truth, I had to say something. I stood up, my legs shaky but holding. I'd go home, showered, try to look like a person who hadn't just had their mind turned inside out. Then I'd talk to Sarah, make things right. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every passing car, every pedestrian, they all seemed to be staring at me, judging me. I hunched my shoulders, trying to make myself smaller, less visible. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in a store window. For a moment, just a split second, I saw myself as I'd appeared in those hallucinations. Pathetic, worthless. I blinked, and my normal reflection returned. But the image lingered in my mind, a ghostly overlay on reality. By the time I reached our apartment building, I was a nervous wreck. My palms were sweating, my heart racing. What if Sarah wasn't alone? What if Dave was there? What if everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard was true? I took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the time to compose myself. With each step, I rehearsed what I'd say. I'm sorry. I had to work late. My phone died. It won't happen again. The lies felt bitter on my tongue, but what choice did I have? Outside our door, I paused. I could hear movement inside. The clink of dishes, the soft murmur of voices. Voices plural. My blood ran cold. Before I could talk myself out of it, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Sarah was there, sitting at the kitchen table, and across from her, leaning in close, was Dave. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions a mixture of surprise and something else. Guilt? I couldn't tell. My vision was tunneling, the edges going dark. "Oh," Sarah said, her voice unnaturally high. "You're home. Dave stopped by to drop off some work files." Work files at 7 in the morning. On a Saturday, I stood there, frozen, as the world tilted around me. This couldn't be happening. It was another hallucination, another trick. Any moment now, I'd blink and Dave would disappear, and everything would be normal again. But he didn't disappear. He stood up, straightening his shirt. His rumpled shirt, I noticed with a surge of nausea. "I should go," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. He squeezed past me, careful not to touch me, and then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah and I stared at each other across the kitchen, a gulf of unspoken accusations between us. "It's not what you think," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't seem to come from me. "Isn't it? Because I think it's exactly what those bastards showed me. What they told me would happen." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? What bastards? Where were you all night?" The questions came rapid fire, each one hitting me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to answer, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly make her understand? Instead, I heard myself saying, "You don't love me anymore, do you?" Sarah's face crumpled. She looked away, and in that moment I knew. Everything they'd shown me, everything they'd told me, It was all true. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It just, Dave and I." But I didn't hear the rest. A roaring filled my ears, drowning out her words, drowning out everything. The room began to spin, the walls closing in just like they had in that sealed chamber. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, triumphant. "We told you," they hissed. "We showed you the truth." I staggered backwards, away from Sarah, away from the truth I couldn't bear to face. My back hit the wall and I slid down, curling into myself as the world fractured around me. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in a maze of paranoia and jealousy of my own making. When I finally looked up, Sarah was gone. A note on the table told me she was staying with her sister, that we needed time apart. The apartment felt cavernous, echoing with absence. I wandered from room to room, seeing signs of Sarah everywhere. Her coffee mug in the sink, her book on the nightstand, her scent lingering on the pillows, and everywhere I looked, I saw Dave too. Had he sat on this couch? Had he used this shower? Had he slept in my bed? The questions consumed me, eating away at my sanity like acid. I needed answers, needed to understand. Before I knew what I was doing, I was out the door, in my car, driving to the address where it had all started. The nondescript office building where they'd taken me apart and put me back together wrong. The parking lot was empty when I arrived, the building dark and silent, but I knew they were in there, watching, waiting. I pounded on the door, screaming for them to let me in, to explain, to fix what they'd broken. "You did this to me," I shouted at the impassive facade. "You showed me the truth and now I can't unsee it. How do I make it stop?" But there was no answer, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, I sank to my knees. The concrete was cool against my forehead as I pressed it to the ground, my fingers scrabbling uselessly at the unyielding door. "Please," I whispered, no longer sure who I was talking to. "The researchers? Myself? Please let me back in. I'll do anything. Just make it stop." But the door remained closed. The voices remained silent. And I remained there, trapped not in a sealed room, but in the prison of my own mind. A prison built on paranoia and jealousy, reinforced by the cruel experiment that had shown me truths I was never meant to see. As darkness fell, I realized the true horror of what had been done to me. The experiment hadn't ended when they let me out of that room. It was still ongoing, and I would be trapped in it forever, reliving those moments, questioning every interaction, doubting every relationship. They had broken something fundamental inside me, something I feared could never be repaired. And as I sat there in the growing darkness, I understood the true nature of the trap I had willingly walked into. It wasn't the sealed room that was the trap. It was my own mind, and I would never escape it.